name is Stephen Lester. I'm the science director here at CHEJ. And for those of you who might not be familiar with CHEJ, we provide organizing and technical assistance to grassroots community groups across the country. We were founded by Lois Gibbs, the community leader from Love Canal, and have been doing this work for over 40 years. Our topic for today is, can lawyers help in your fight? We have a guest speaker who is going to talk about the pros and cons of hiring a lawyer, and we're going to explore the when and why you might want to and situations when you might not want to. Before I actually introduce our guest speaker, a few logistics. Everybody will be muted. If you have questions, we're going to ask you to please put them in the chat. Pete is going to give about maybe 20 minutes of conversation, and then we'll throw things open. So you'll have an opportunity to directly ask Pete, or we'll take the questions that have come in through the chat. And I want to be clear that Pete is not here to give legal advice. That's not something that is going to happen today. So just to be clear, we don't be looking or expecting legal advice while on the call. So it is with great pleasure and honor that I get to introduce our guest speaker today, Peter Sessa. Pete has been involved with CHEJ pretty much since the very beginning, from the early days of our conventions. He has been on our board for maybe 25 years. Maybe half of which he was the chair of our board. And he's also been a key part of our strategic brain trust, the people that we look to help guide and focus our work on providing assistance to grassroots community leaders and organizations. We wouldn't be here without the help of folks like Pete Sessa. I want to thank you, Pete. Pete has worked as a partner in several law firms over the years, I think for about 25 years, including his own law firm. Before that, he worked with legal services, providing training of lawyers on how to work with community organizations. And most recently, he served as the director of the Community Business Clinic at Northeastern University School of Law. So Pete, it's great pleasure and honor that I get to say you have the floor. It's a great honor to be a part of working with you again. And so, Pete, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Steve, thank you so much. I want to say that to start off that I'm extremely proud to have been involved with CHEJ through all these years. It's been an extremely effective organization for folks all around the country that really needed the assistance and expertise that CHEJ could help bring to the table. So I thank Steve. I want to thank Lois for all her work and leadership over the years, Sharon Franklin, Teresa Mills, and newly met Hunter, who's doing all the technology here, which I really don't want to use a bad word at, but let's just say it's not my expertise. So it took them a while to get me on the Zoom and up and running in a proper way. So anyway, there's only so much we can cover today. I want to say that I have reread the book on lawyering from CHEJ that was put together, a user's guide to lawyers, and it was put together in, I don't know, 2000 whatever, but it was revised in 2009. I went back and read it for this, and I would highly recommend your looking at it. And I think many of the things I'll say are highlighted in that as well. So as I thought about this, what will we talk about today? How do we do this? I think maybe some general lessons I've learned and observations I've made over the 40 years that I've done this kind of work, working with community groups on a wide variety of issues. So what makes a lawyer an effective lawyer for an environmental or a community group? That's the first thing I'd like to discuss. And again, after working with so many of these groups and actually teaching on this, and training would be more accurate, I boiled it down to about 4 factors and qualities that I think an effective lawyer should possess. One, does a lawyer listen? Do they spend the time to understand your group? Do they observe your group dynamics? Is there one leader, for instance? Is there a steering committee? How do you make your decisions? They need to listen to that and observe that. And then they need to observe what is your risk tolerance at that particular time, because the risk tolerance can increase over a period of representation. For instance, is the group just focused on writing letters to the editor? Or is the group door knocking? Is the group doing direct action, i.e. pickets? You should know that lawyers are risk adverse by training, but you're the boss. The lawyer can help, but they should not be your leader or spokesperson, with some exceptions. Nor should they be dictating your strategy. That has to come from within your group. Secondly, do they talk like a person? An effective lawyer needs to demystify the law. In other words, explain the law in terms that we can all understand so that you can make the decisions. You can make informed decisions. We've all been to doctors, unfortunately, at one point or another, and you know the doctors that can explain what your conditions are and what your choices are, versus ones that do techno-speak to you, and you walk out and one of your fellows says to you, whoever you're with, says, what did they tell you? What should you do? I have no clue. Well, unfortunately, we've had many experiences with lawyers like that. And part of it is sometimes they just want to show off their knowledge, but that's not effective. The third one is look for possibilities, not roadblocks. Lawyers are known to say, no, 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 no. You can't do this, you can't do that. And that transcends beyond just working with community groups. It's also in very many business situations or just general civil litigation situations. That is not effective. If they've listened to you and they've really observed you and are taking a lead from you, then they can well say to you, no, you can't do this because this will be really problematic because of A, B, and C. But then they also could be looking at, but you could do this instead and get around that regulation or that ordinance in a various town or city or law. And that kind of brings me to being effective with the lawyer being your spokesperson. I've watched meetings where the lawyer was speaking and it was really interesting. This is very early in my career, and I was watching some other, let's say, senior lawyers talking, and they were at a community meeting, and they went on and on about Hale versus Dorr and this and that, and people were falling asleep, and then they don't want to come back to another meeting is what eventually happens. But we found a different method that might be more effective. And this is, again, looking for possibilities. So I've listened to the community group and observed their goals, et cetera. We meet, if they're going to have me or someone speak at a meeting, there's other ways to do that. And that is, just to give you an example. So the lawyer stands up, but before the lawyer stands up, the steering committee or the leadership, whatever you call them yourselves, says, well, today Pete Sessa is going to speak, but he's going to speak to A, B, and C. And now you've worked this out before that I'm going to do it in a very short manner, kind of a informed consent, if you will, and not dig a deep rabbit hole on everything, which will lose the crowd, because you can get your message across without doing that. Then if there's questions, so then I get up and I'll address A, B, and C. And then if there are questions, they have to go through the steering committee. And that's just a little example for you. But what I noticed with lawyers taking over a meeting was that it was almost like a cartoon. The lawyer got huge, gradually just got huge, like this on the stage. I don't know if you can see my hands, but I'm making a huge sign, okay? And the steering committee got smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, that is not good for power and for the long-term fight. Looking for possibilities also is who else can help you with your fight besides a lawyer? If you're going to do a press conference, for instance, maybe you want a pastor there. Maybe you want, if it's, I did some work with folks up in the Upper Peninsula on a copper sulfide mine. And maybe you want a miner in that picture, wearing the hat, so it's visible. So you're reaching out to different people. And more importantly, the opposition then just can't corner you and say, well, these are extremists, so-and-so. The fourth cornerstone, if you will, is to think strategically and tactically. Now that involves the client input into whatever litigation process, if that's the way you're going, is going to happen. So for instance, with negotiations, and you'll see a handout after this with a group I worked with in Boston called the Chinatown Task Force. So we had negotiations with the landlord. It was a very large apartment building. And what we did was, instead of me negotiating with their lawyer, we set up a negotiation with our steering committee and their lawyer and the landlord. And let's just say you could read the story, but it was a fairly interesting dynamics. But I didn't just let them loose on that. We role played the negotiations a number of times in an hour-and-a-half session. And they had quite a bit of fun with it, and it became a very effective tactic. And I think that's, again, thinking strategically and tactically, and not just thinking inside the box, oh, the lawyers negotiate for us. I would say to you, if the lawyers don't follow these four cornerstones, the chances are they will not be an effective lawyer for you. And, you know, why do you need a lawyer? Well, I think this is spelled out very well in the, again, in the handout that you will get from CHEJ. Lawyer can be very helpful in protection. The lawyer can help you possibly get money, although I wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket. They can help you get information. Now, a strategic way that we do this is, so if we're going to file a lawsuit, there's many aspects of that. There's a thing called discovery, which is where you would get information. You might have heard of these things before. They're called interrogatories, written questions to the other side that they have to answer under oath. Depositions, where they have to come into the lawyer's office or another setting and answer questions, again, under oath and recorded. This can be a very valuable tool. What I have done with community groups in the past is I don't just draft those or pull them out of a form book. I sit down with them, or the steering committee or the litigation committee, whatever, and they write up questions, or they tell me what information they think they need to know. They know it much better than I do. They've been in this fight for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So they know the stuff they need a lot better. There's also exposure. We can help expose the other side. One thing we do sometimes is we will put pressure on them, economic pressure on them, by and also public pressure on them by doing some things like we would, if it's a really huge corporation you're dealing with, that we would subpoena, okay, for questioning under oath the CEO of the company. They don't like that. They really don't like that. And then they'll put pressure on their lawyers. Well, what can we do? Well, they'll put pressure on their staff. What can we do to make this go away? I don't want to go from LA to Toledo, Ohio, and have to answer these questions. So again, that's kind of the way, that's the way we kind of approach things, to be an effective lawyer for community groups. That's just kind of the general. I know there's people may have some questions and stuff. I didn't want to take up all the time just waxing on. I would underline, though, that we're here to, remember, you're the boss. Often clients forget that when a lawyer's involved. You're the boss. You could fire the lawyer at any time. You're the spokesperson. It's your message. They can help you with your presentations in many ways, public hearings, negotiations, role play, all that kind of thing. They can help you with that. But we've found it to be more effective in, not necessarily in a court setting, that's a little more complicated, but certainly in public hearings, et cetera, you don't need the lawyer to be your spokesperson there. They can help you prepare, and they can help you be even more effective. But we pack the courthouses. We pack the public hearings. We help train our folks so they can, to be ready for certain kinds of interference from the other side, questions from the board of selectmen or whoever they are. So remember that, please, that you're the boss and you're the director. And if they're not listening to you about that, and if they're no, I think you need to look for another lawyer. And how to find a lawyer is a good question. I'll anticipate that coming up. Well, one, I think like with doctors or anything else that you're looking for, some sort of expert, you're looking for a plumber, you ask around who's had a good experience. There are organizations that might be able to help you also. National environmental groups like CHEJ. There's also law groups, purely law groups, like the American Civil Liberties Union or Legal Services Corporation, that can help you and possibly provide legal services for you, representation for you, and also for free with very competent and aggressive people that will listen to you. That's what I have for now, Steve.
Okay, great. Let me ask you a question there. I've seen a couple of hands come up, so I'll call on them and then we'll throw things open again. But one question I have for you, Pete, is from your experience, if a group decides to hire an attorney, what do you typically see happening with the group itself if they're making a decision to hire a lawyer? Do you know what I mean?
No, well, I mean, a lot of different things.
Yes, yes.
Sometimes what happens is they're hiring a lawyer perhaps a little too early in their fight before they built up enough political power and momentum. And you'll have a meeting where they say, oh, we've hired Susie Jones, and Susie Jones gets up there and just starts speaking and speaking and speaking. And next thing you know, they call their next meeting and half the people don't show up, if even more don't show up, because they say, well, the lawyer's going to handle this. We don't need to be involved anymore. That's one thing I've seen. Right. Yeah, and again, if you lose that, we've found these fights over the years to be political and power struggles. And while law can play a part in it, we've found that if it's the centerpiece of your organizing strategy, it's not very effective.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, that's something we've seen.
It's one tool. It can be one tool in your organizing toolbox, if you will. And I'm not anti-lawyer, by the way. Well, some lawyers I am, but that's a joke, folks.
All right, I'm gonna call on a couple of people who've had their hands up, showed it on the screen. Lois, you were the first one. Do you still have a comment or question? You have to unmute yourself, Lois. All right, let's move on. Maybe Lois not. I don't know where she might be. Katie, you had your hand up. Katie Whitehead, if you would just identify.
I didn't have my hand up.
Oh,
Not, at least not that I know of.
okay, it showed up on
Well,
the
hi,
screen,
Katie.
but that's okay. Maybe Lois didn't either. There was maybe perhaps an accident. I don't know. All right, so so we are now we have some time for questions. I don't see anything in the chat exactly. So if you have questions, then take yourself off mute and we can.
The hands I see are Linda and Darlene.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Okay. So Linda, why don't you go first? And then Darlene. You have to take yourself off mute.
Oh, there we go. Okay, got it. Hi, my name is Linda. I live in Tucson, Arizona. In the Tucson South Side, our community has been affected by numerous toxic chemicals from past and from current, including PFAS and from past TCE and many other chemicals coming from the Air Force, from the Air Force Plant 44 and several government contractors. It's really hard for our community to file any kind of lawsuits because there's just, you know, is it this chemical? Is it that chemical that's causing all these problems? And I just feel like that's just very unfair. Is there anything legally that we could do? I mean, because we do have like a cancer cluster, tons of them, and you know, and we all believe it's the water.
Yeah, how long have you been working on this, Linda?
I've been on this since 2014.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
So
2014.
you have a lot of information. You have a lot of information, I
Yes.
assume. Have you had any science work done?
No, not particularly, no.
Yeah. Because we often find that getting that information, you know, about the down at Cape Cod where I live now, we had the same. I was not involved as a lawyer in that group, but we had the same kind of thing with the Otis Air Force Base nearby.
Mm-hmm.
And they created a lot of issues. You know, back in the day, they were dumping all this diesel fuel and stuff, or, you know, this heavy fuel they were using for the planes, et cetera. They were just dumping it. And it really got into what they called a plume here, a plume. So it just went, you know, it was going out and it was going to pollute all the waters around here. So it became a very hot political issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it became very effective with the regular citizenry talking about, in our case, so it was the fishing industry that was going to be effective, the recreational industry that was going to be effective, which was a lifeblood here. So I can't compare it to Tucson, but I'm sure there's similar issues there. So what became very effective was putting an enormous amount of political pressure on the politicians and the decision makers and in this case, the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And it would they organized community meetings where people got up and said, you know, what's going on? And, you know, there would be a pushback from, well, we don't really know, it's not this. But then the scientists started coming in, et cetera, and analyzing what was going on, much like at Love Canal and Steve Lester's work there, et cetera. And that became a very motivating by bringing that out to the public in many forums, including the public hearings, became very effective in getting the cleanup from the Environmental Protection Agency. Yeah.
And one of the things that we reached out to some attorneys that were representing the water companies who filed lawsuits against the PFAS, AFFF producers, manufacturers, DuPont, and many others. And when we contacted those attorneys, they included us in the lawsuits. But then when I asked them, did you file a lawsuit and on my behalf Have you filed the lawsuit? And if so, can you send me that information? Well, they didn't call me back for a long time.
Oh, boy.
Until finally I found out that no, they never filed the suit on our behalf. However, what they're saying is that we signed an agreement with them, retainer agreement, that we were hiring them, and all we're really getting from them is just like updates. And it could be very confusing when you're thinking that you're a plaintiff, you're been included in this lawsuit. They
Yeah,
call them bellwether lawsuits.
okay.
Yeah, well, I think, Pete really can't comment a whole lot on that, Linda.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it. I get it.
But I
mean, it's
can
just that
say
he-
this,
yeah.
but Linda, I will say this, using the smell test, if you will, no pun intended about toxics and stuff, but my
Mhm.
lawyer's smell test says something's not right here. They should be meeting with you, they should be communicating with you, and they should be communicating with you in a way that you understand, which was what I was
Mhm.
talking about earlier. And I've heard stories like this all around. This is not unique. You should know that.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if there's other groups that are experiencing the same kind of thing around the country that you can network with that would be helpful.
Thank you.
And that's certainly something that CHEJ has done through the years. We've put groups together that are fighting on similar fights. And that can be very, very helpful. It's uplifting because you realize you're not alone.
Mhm.
And the issues you're dealing with, not only with the opposition, if you will,
Yeah.
but with the politicians and within your own group.
Mhm.
It could be very, very empowering in your fight. And I
Thank you.
respect that you've been involved in this that long, Linda,
Yeah.
because I've been involved in some long fights myself, and man, they wear you down.
Yeah, they do.
Exactly. That sigh we should record. It's perfect. It's like, oh
Thank you.
man,
Mm.
All right, thanks, Linda. Darlene, you're next. Darlene Schoenfeld.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate the discussion very much. One issue I'm working on with a nonprofit in the state of Washington. We have what we call CAFOs of the sea, these huge shellfish farms. They're like, animal farms on land, but they take over the waters, the near shores, and they deprive the animals, the wildlife, of their feed and their habitat. The particular issue is this. A particular applicant wants to put one of these in a national wildlife refuge. We have done
Darlene, excuse me, a particular what?
Applicant.
Oh, applicant. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. It's breaking up on my end, maybe a little bit. Sorry.
No, it's probably my voice. I'm sorry.
Whatever. It's okay. It's okay.
So they have all their federal and their state and their local permits, even though the Corps of Engineers admitted that if this goes in, it will destabilize this refuge. Critical here is that it would be the first U.S. Fish and Wildlife area to allow such one of these projects, these industrial operations, and it means it could be a precedent setting for the rest of our wildlife refuges in the nation. Now, we have done our homework and our outreach nationwide, and letters have come in from all over the country into the permitting agencies who won't back off. When I talk to, and I've searched for attorneys, either for Clean Water Act or Migratory Bird Treaty Act or animal rights acts. Some of them are very sympathetic, but because the applicant is a tribe, they won't touch this. Now,
I
in
see.
Washington State, tribes are not tribes when it comes to growing shellfish. Harvesting real shellfish, yes, but growing them, they're not. They're a corporation like anybody else. Is there some lawyer association that I could reach out? I can't find attorneys, and I need to find an attorney that will listen and take this on. And I've run out of attorneys to reach out to, and I'm wondering if there's some kind of association I can go to, and do they all have to practice in Washington, even though it's a national issue?
I'm not laughing at you.
No, I know. This is a tough one.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Darlene, for making my day today and making me say I have no clue. No, I mean, you know, the tricky part here is it's because if I'm hearing you correctly, it's a shellfish farm versus wildlife. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't have a farmers association that might be being affected. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But if there was an angle like that the shellfish farms were harming something that there would be either people attached to or World Wildlife Foundation, perhaps, somebody that would have an interest in that wildlife being deprived of feed, if I'm understanding that correctly,
Mm-hmm.
that might see it as a test case
Yeah,
where they would almost be representing the wildlife.
Yeah.
Darlene, we should maybe talk afterwards, because there's a group that I know up in the Pacific Northwest that's involved in a couple of different fights, legal fights, and maybe they have some suggestions.
Oh, if you mean the Coalition to Protect Puget Sound, or Puget Sound Coalition that's in court now?
No, it's different. It's up
Okay.
Willapa Bay. I'm not sure if I'm
Who-
pronouncing.
I'm sorry, who?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. There's a Willapa Bay, perhaps.
Willapa.
Willapa.
Yeah, that's the group. I know them very well.
Oh, you do? Okay, all right then. So,
Yeah, and their attorney won't take this on.
okay, all right,
Thank you.
all right. Well, thanks for your question. So Pam Lads, I believe you're next, and if you just identify if you're with an organization, that would be great.
I'm part of, good morning, good afternoon. I'm part of an organization called DUMP, and we are a small group in northern Vermont opposing the owners of the only landfill in the state, a landfill that is quite happy to pollute us and take all of the garbage from in-state and toxic waste from out of state. That's the short version. Finding legal assistance. I mean, we're real clear about our issues and where we need help and where we don't. But we're a small group. We're in a sacrifice zone in the state. Money is not something that flows freely up here other than to corporations. Where do we find a lawyer that we can afford, given that our money is minimal? And two, really where we are right now is the bad guys who we need to take on are the state, because they have not done their due diligence. They are in effect sleeping with the enemy. So the foxes are guarding the chickens and doing a really bad job. Where do we go? How do we go?
May I say something first? And what's your name again, please? I missed that.
Pam.
Pam.
Mhm.
It's my Brooklyn accent. Sorry,
No, I
Pam.
noticed it.
You did?
Yeah, I live with
Good.
one, so you know.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
Anyone
I haven't
who
lost
says
it after all.
huge, it's a giveaway.
Yes, yes. You know, one thing when you ask lawyers, I always taught my students this, that if I don't know an answer to a question, if you don't know, say, I don't know. But I have people and I'll try to find out.
Mhm.
So I'm not familiar with all the legal resources up in Vermont.
Very
But
few.
well, no, but there's legal services up there. And there are people that are, we call them social justice lawyers.
Mhm.
And if you don't know them, or the people in your group obviously don't know them, but legal services, while they may not be able to take a case, they may be able to refer you to somebody that would have an interest in that.
Mhm.
One. Two, one of the things that always really impressed me with CHEJ from the very beginning was, and Steve or Lois, who's ever on, will have these statistics or can fill it in much better than I can. They stopped or closed so many landfills, and not one with litigation. I want to repeat that. They closed and stopped so many landfills
Yes,
without litigation.
they did. And we know that. And the outcome of that was that the only landfill in Vermont is the one up with us. That's what happens when you close other landfills and when a landfill is owned by a great big ugly corporation.
Mm-hmm.
It opens in an area where there's the least opposition because there are so few people. But that landfill is right on the border of a lake, an international lake.
Wow.
So yeah, we understand the value of closing small landfills. The downside of that is we got it.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm not,
And your
we've already
and your
had, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, please.
I
The political powers that be there, both
uh-huh.
local and state, and you know, I think Bernie Sanders is up there.
We know.
No,
Yeah, sure.
no help.
No,
No
it's
help,
not,
right?
it's not much help locally, no. And our local politicians, the real challenge is the regulating body, the Agency of Natural Resources, is sleeping with the enemy. That's how they get their income. All the garbage that comes in, they get a whopping fee. There is no motivation to change this. And as everybody else in the state tells us very smugly is, well, it has to go somewhere. And the risk of poisoning an international lake is those who will be most harmed by it are in Canada, Quebec. And no, they're not happy about it either. And they're trying to do something, but this isn't enough. And we can't find a lawyer currently that we can even begin to afford. And we had a pro bono lawyer or a very low fee lawyer for the last round, and she was great, but she can't keep doing it and doesn't have anybody else in mind. Right. That's our frustration.
Just one thought that I see, Pam, in your situation is given that scenario, it seems you have little choice but to double down on your organizing work. That instead, you know, I mean, I know it's not, I'm not saying anything that's easy or anything you haven't already thought of yourself.
Right.
But it does seem like that seems to be what your choice is here.
Right.
And so, there's how you go about doing that. I mean, we'd be happy to sit and talk with you if we can provide anything new or different that maybe you haven't thought of. But ultimately, it just means, getting more people involved and getting more people to say enough is enough.
I agree.
Pam, I'm sorry. So there's a great resource right there. But two, I was just thinking about it, Pam, and I may be mistaken, but I believe that the University of Vermont has a huge environmental studies program.
That's not actually totally true. They have just
Okay.
in the law school, they have an environmental science.
In the law school, excuse me, I meant in the law school, Pam.
The law school has just reopened that program, and we are in contact with them. But it was not functioning for quite a while, and they're just reactivating it. So
I see.
we can hope for great things, but that's really beginning stages for them.
Yes. Yes, but they're free, and
Yes.
they
We'll
they
take
could be they could be an effective ally with, as
Right.
Steve was saying, doubling down the organizing and embarrassing the hell out of whoever you have to embarrass the hell out of.
That's
And if
that's
they and if you're saying that some of the officials in town, et cetera, or the permitting people are profiting from this
they are.
and making decisions about it,
Mhm.
well, I would just say expose them, expose them, expose them.
We do. We were
Okay,
just hoping for a
well-
miracle too, but thank you anyway. And we are in
Yes.
contact with the law school and doing what we can.
Good, okay.
I will be in contact with Stephen Lester.
Okay, great. All right,
Thank you.
thank you, Pam. All right, let's move on. Greg Lemberg, you're next.
Thank you. So I'm part of an organization. We're down in central New Jersey. And for the last 16 months, we've been fighting against artificial turf being installed at, or proposed to be installed at a middle school in town. And it will essentially eradicate all of the natural space behind the school. And there's already an artificial turf field across the street. That's the high school athletic stadium. But without boring you with all the details, the question that I had was there's sort of two. One is anyone familiar with a similar fight going on? I've heard of various ones around here and there. Martha's Vineyard is one of them. But I wondered, in terms of maybe connecting to other organizations that are, against a similar type of obstacle, would anyone know of any organization? And then the second point, specific to our situation, we know that the one thing the mayor in town who's pushing this project, it's kind of her pet project, is sensitive to is bad press. And we have had a lot of trouble getting to anything beyond just like the local paper, hard paper and online papers that support the town. The other papers and news organizations have not been responsive up until now.
Pete, do you have any comments there?
Just a quick comment. I'm not familiar with any other organization that's fighting this, and I haven't even heard about the one in Martha's Vineyard. Not that I hear everything, but I am fairly near there, but I haven't honestly heard anything about that. Are you in touch with that organization by any chance? Greg?
We have reached out, and just very recently, and we have not heard back yet from them. What are they called again?
Well, the only other comment I have.
Sorry, it's called the Field Fund. My wife just reminded me
There's
of
not a phone number.
of
It's on
their-
the email.
their name.
Okay,
Greg?
I'm not.
Okay. I just wanted to say,
Go ahead,
Greg,
Steve.
CHEJ has worked with a few groups dealing with that issue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if litigation's been involved, but I will check into that and follow up with you on that. So that I don't know if, like I said, if there's been any legal issue involved in it. I know we've been involved. with
I would just also add on, if you don't mind, Steve. One thing I heard, because I do listen, one thing I heard right away as a lawyer was that the decision maker there, it seems, her pet project, is very sensitive about bad publicity. That is a great pressure point.
Yeah, that
We've seen it in action sometime last year. There was a a group called Swimply. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they help people rent out their pools. And there was an incident in town where somebody rented out their backyard pool to a group. They made a lot of noise up until, all hours of the night, et cetera, et cetera. The next thing you know, there was a local news crew from one of the bigger news outlets covering the story. And at the very next town council meeting, surprisingly, there was an ordinance that forbid that organization from operating in town anymore.
Right.
So-
So that's, Greg, you're just underlying exactly what I was smelling,
Yeah,
right? I mean, the next hearing, you pack it.
Yeah, we've been to virtually every town council meeting and every Board of Education meeting, because this is going on Board of Ed property for the last
Yes.
16 months. And we've come at the project and the downsides of it from every angle that you can think of, from health and safety, environment. The costs are outrageous. It's a $9 million project. The inequity,
Jesus.
because there's two different middle schools in town, one of which not only has its own grassy areas for the kids to play on, but has a park immediately adjacent. And this middle school, which covers half the town's population, is going to be completely cut off from any sort of natural green space. So there's an equity issue that's floating around as well. And it so far it has fallen on largely deaf ears. It is a split camp in both the town council and in the Board of Ed, but right now the other side is winning, I'll say, and we're coming to a head with a vote in the next month or two at the latest.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, it's unfortunate I don't know if you were participated in our earlier training call last month with Lois Gibbs. She did a training call on messaging, and that might have provided you some ideas as to how to generate the kind of media attention. And you have to do things that capture the media attention. You have to have images, things that they can see. So I know it's not easy, but
Yeah, thank you. We just found out about your organization through Dr. Diana Zuckerman in time for this call, but we're not on the last one.
okay. I'll see if we can share with you some of her handouts from that call. That might be helpful.
thank you.
All right, we have a couple more calls as we're winding down in time. A couple more people. Myra Dotson, you're next.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Myra Dodson, and I have a group called Sewage Sludge Action Network, and we're active in middle section of North Carolina. I've personally lived in an area with sludge fields, about 19 different sludge fields. One of them is so contaminated with heavy metals, it qualifies for Superfund, EPA Superfund. And this has been going on, of course, since mid-1980s. So I have done an extensive amount of testing on my well, and it's come back very toxic. And so I'm interested in finding, and I've also discovered that the wastewater treatment plant that sludges my neighborhood also has been participating in illegally dumping waste, toxic waste, other types of toxic waste, specifically coal ash leachate. And they've done that illegally, of course. I am interested in, I have a couple questions. One is, there's a lot of groups of lawyers that are working on class action lawsuits in Wilmington in combination with the Gen X situation there. And they all seem to be out of state. I have done a lot of testing on my well, And I've also done testing on my sediment in an old hot water heater, and both have come back extremely toxic. And the toxic things that have come back, the toxic chemicals that have come back in the water and in the sediment also are fingerprinted to the sewage sludge that this wastewater treatment plant dumps in my neighborhood. So I've done a whole lot of footwork that a lawyer would like. And so my first question is, would it be better to try to find a lawyer in my state or out of state? Also, second question would be, is there a lawyer that specializes in sewage sludge contamination? Because my ultimate goal is to open the door for class action lawsuits for people that are impacted, specifically well water, by sewage sludge in their vicinities and locations. So that's the second question, is a lawyer specializing in sewage sludge. Third question is, where do I go to get a list of environmental lawyers that would be interested in this ultimate goal of opening the door for class action?
The one thing one of the things people have done and asked me about is they would call up the Massachusetts Bar Association, and ask for referrals to environmental lawyers. But you have to be careful about that, Myra, because a lot of the environmental lawyers they're going to list as environmental lawyers are working for the other side, for the polluters.
Right.
So just be aware of that on any referral kind of service. Okay. I don't happen to know. Sometimes it's also helpful. Once again, I know I worked at Northeastern as a professor of law there, but it doesn't. That's not why I'm saying. Sometimes the universities have really good resources. The closest universities in state have good resources to help you with the science of your fight, as well as they maybe, if they're attached to a law school, have some an environmental program there where people can receive some help.
All right, can I interrupt you right there? The universities, we have a supreme quality system of universities. I'm within almost walking distance of NC State, UNC, and Duke, all of which are co-opted to the sludge industry. So going to them, either their law school or their science department, because I have been associated with a lot of scientists in some of these universities, but the help from them is very limited because they are co-opted by the sludge industry in the state. And in fact, UNC is my a lifetime alumni, won't even let me on campus to hand out information. I'm even banned from putting an ad in the student newspaper. So they're very pro, all three are very pro sludge universities. Matter of fact, Duke University gets a huge amount of money from Synagro. NC State has a class. You can get a degree in dumping sewage sludge. So going to the universities is a complete farcical, fanciful idea. Sorry about that, but that's the way it is with me.
I suspect, Myra, that you're already in touch with some of the other groups that are fighting sludge around the country, right?
Well, yes, but most of them have not taken testing to the degree that I have. And they don't have the paperwork to go into a lawyer's office, thump it down on the desk and say, look what I've got. So they're not in a position to really look for a lawyer to start any kind of legal work.
Myra, question for you, if you don't mind. Are you, do you have a group with you as well? Or is this, because I'm just hearing a lot of I testing my well. I mean, are other people experience the same thing? Are you involved? Are you all together?
No one else has well, I'll take that back. Some people have tested their well, and but not to the extent that I have. I mean, I've gone to labs. I've driven my samples to labs out of state, and those labs are have very complex, say, for instance, PFAS testing abilities. And so nobody has gone to the extent that I have. And I've also done work with my well. In fact, I pulled the pump up and had it stirred. It's a 500-foot well, and I've had it stirred so I can get the best homogeneous sample as possible of the entire water column. So nobody has done that, and nobody, maybe they don't have the resources that I've had to do this kind of work. But yeah, it's a solitary fight as far as I'm concerned, right at this point.
All right, well, we have to move on. It's 1 o'clock. Our time is over. I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to start also by saying again, Pete, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your experience and offering suggestions that hopefully can help people in their local fights. We will do a follow-up to everybody that will include 2 handouts. The guidebook, User's Guide to Lawyers, we will send to everybody. It's something CH provides a lot of the spirit of what Pete was talking about in terms of advice on how to deal with lawyers. And we also have a second handout, which is the story of the Chinatown task force that Pete mentioned earlier. So we will send that out along with the recording of the call. If there were any other questions that we never got to, we'll take a look at it and try to get back to you on that. So again, thank you all. Our next call in our training series is in November on the 15th. We will have folks from Gaia, the Global Alliance Against Incineration. No, I got that wrong. Well, anyway, Gaia will be there. I've messed up their name, apologize. But they will be here to talk about chemical recycling and some of the kinds of approaches that different industries, different companies are taking to try to sell incinerators under different names. So that's our next training. We'll send out announcements so those of you who are interested can be a part of that. So thank you again. Thank you again, Pete, and good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Steve.